Hello there, you're watching the Nation Update at 2 p.m. with me, Jessy Chahal. I'm reporting live from home. Well, that is the new norm. In today's edition, we keep you updated with what's happening in the news. Of course, we have a lot to unpack in the next half an hour, mainly on the Dewan Rakyat. Political and economic analyst Dr. Owisan joins me for a quick look at stories buzzing at the Parliament. Now, let's begin with this. Firstly, it's the second day of day 5 of a Parliament in session, and during today's briefing earlier in the morning at the Dewan Rakyat, the Health Minister says there are 221 hospitals treating COVID-19 patients nationwide. And out of that, to date, 104 out of the 146 Health Ministry hospitals, 6 teaching university hospitals, 112 private hospitals, and 1 Malaysian Air Force Armed Forces Hospital are all treating COVID-19 patients. 11 hospitals under the Health Ministry are fully dedicated to treating COVID-19 patients, while the rest are also treating non-COVID-19 patients. Now, here's a quick reminder to everyone, no matter where you are across the country, please adhere to the SOPs, stay home to stay safe. Remember, none of us are safe until all of us are safe, and that means we really need to ensure that we sign ourselves up for the vaccination process as well. Now, back to the Dewan Rakyat. Matters related to the revocation of the emergency ordinances continue to be a hot topic for discussion at the special meeting, with several opposition MPs demanding immediate explanation and clarification. Now, they're referring to Article 150, sub 3 of the Federal Constitution, where Gobind Singh Deo had questioned whether the revocation of the ordinances was consented to by the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, and whether it was done in accordance with the procedures stated in the Federal Constitution. Of course, he was the former Multimedia and Communications Minister, posting those questions forward to the Speaker as well, who we also know has been questioned many times as well by other MPs in that Dewan Rakyat. Now we're joined by Dr. Owisan, Senior Fellow from the Singapore Institute of International Affairs. Hi, Doc. Thanks for joining me today. You too, working from home, and we have
That's
lots to
right.
discuss. Of course, in view of what's going on at the Parliament. So it is day 2 out of day 5, yesterday being the first day. It started off with a bit of chaos that ensued very quickly once the Dewan Rakyat was in session. Doctor, what can we tell from the rather loud and rowdy exchanges over the last 2 days at Parliament?
Well, I think a lot of members of parliament are understandably and perhaps justifiably quite upset and frustrated because Parliament has not been sitting for almost 8 months. And during these 8 months, of course, the country is facing a very difficult pandemic, and also the economic development of the country is really going downhill. While these MPs could essentially do not much about it besides, number one, waiting for the opportunity to indeed express their views, and number two, doing what they could to help out their constituents. So when there's such an opportunity for them to officially meet, well, there were further constraints. Obviously, they were not allowed to undergo parliamentary votings. So, well, of course, then they take advantage of the sittings in order to vent some of their, number one, frustration, but number two, also, as we saw just now, some quite constructive opinions. Yeah.
Right, Doctor. Well, so you did say the word, or rather use the word frustration, and we know we've seen that and heard a lot of that on social media as well. Civilians themselves, Malaysians across the country, have a lot of questions they are posting as well. So frustration in and out of the Dewan Rakyat, people are venting out, including the MPs. Also, we have noticed that substantial debate at this point has not taken place yet. So with all that in mind, Doctor, what can we realistically expect out of this Parliament session?
Well, I think this parliamentary sessions was convened in order to fulfill His Majesty the King's repeated calling to hold such a meeting as soon as possible. But of course, frankly speaking, the government of the day, they would like to prolong their rule for as long as possible. And that could only be affected, of course, when there is no show of the other side of the political divide having commanded the parliamentary majority. So you could see parliamentary votings sort of averted at all costs, including, for example, as we saw, the ordinances which were proclaimed directly by the government during the emergency. Constitutionally, they would have to be voted upon by the parliament, but the government has taken the decision to essentially cancel those ordinances instead of submitting them for votings during parliamentary session. So I think going ahead, even after this parliamentary session, I think you will still see a lot of new developments as to how, for example, the parliamentary votings especially could be avoided at all costs.
So, Doc, with that in mind, and in such instances as well, I guess the question is there, and if so, what are the reforms that are needed to enable a more effective parliament?
Well, going ahead, of course, if we were to reform these parliaments, we have a lot of examples from around the world. We should, for example, look forward to a more autonomous parliaments instead of a parliament where its agenda is always determined by the government of the day, because the government of the day understandably would of course set the parliamentary agenda mainly to their own advantage, and the results are of course planned for all to see. Namely, for example, we have a parliamentary session where again parliamentary votes are avoided at all costs. So in order to effectuate such parliamentary reforms, I think it's very difficult for it to happen under the present government. We would have to really look into, I think, quite a distant future in order for this parliamentary reform to even start to be considered here.
Right, Dr. Well, let's take a look at yesterday's sitting. The Prime Minister gave a statement on the National Recovery Plan. He gave assurance that the government will not let the people suffer. But there seems to have been a lot of blowback, and many are questioning his absence to a certain extent as well in terms of not addressing some of the issues at hand. What must his position be at a time like this?
Well, of course, the Prime Minister is in understandably difficult situations because the pandemic is still raging. In fact, it got much more serious than during, let's say, the beginning of the year when the emergency was proclaimed. And the economy, it's obviously also not doing well. So the Prime Minister and the government of the day, I think, would have to at least sit through for another few months until the vaccination rate is high enough that the numbers of newly infected patients would start going down, and thereby more sectors could be opened up for economic activities. Until then, I think the people would have a rather, shall we say, not so favorable view of the government. So Tan Sri Muhyiddin, I think, would have a very tough, let's say, 2 or 3 months ahead in order to maneuver the political waters.
Okay, so with that in mind, in terms of providing assistance, we know that it's been said the government is needed to reevaluate the poverty line income limit, or the PGK, based on the current situation following the outbreak, so that aid could be given more fairly and holistically. Do we need this, and how do we go about this in terms of making changes? This statement, of course, made by Nurul Izzah, YB Nurul Izzah herself.
Well, it's not difficult to adjust our poverty line. Basically, we have every 5 or 10 years a certain national census, right? During that census, people would report their incomes and so on. And then our census authorities, they will, well, draw these sort of lines. So the government of the day, whether this or future governments, they simply will have to, number one, take into account the economic realities, the social economic realities on the ground. I need to emphasize social because sometimes on average, the income level might actually be quite decent, but there are actually pockets of really absolute poverties whereby people are suffering very difficultly. So that's why you need to listen to inputs from members of parliament as well as various other grassroots organizations, such that the government could take a decision and ask the Census Bureau to then adjust these poverty lines. And when this poverty lines is adjusted, presumably upwards, that means people with so-called higher income will still be considered poor, so that the appropriate helps and assistance could be channeled to them more effectively. So it could be done, and it's actually not difficult. Listen carefully, and then you ask the census authority to do it. Yeah.
Doc, I'm jumping in now with less than a minute on our clock. Beginning today, we know that there will be daily announcement of the movement control SOP enforcement activities, which will be done by Senior Foreign Minister of Security Cluster. What can he do? What can Datuk Sri Hishamuddin do to be better at the work that's being done in this particular portfolio? Doctor, not much time left on the clock.
Well, of course, I think because Dr. Hisham has handled, for example, the MH370 incidents quite well to worldwide acclaim and so on. So I think the government is hopeful that with him sort of facing the general public, the government could perhaps have a slightly better image in terms of delivering the various, sometimes not so savory messages about movement controls and so on. Yeah.
That's right. Thank you, Dr. Oisan, for weighing in on your perspective. I think you used the right word, not so savory. People are looking for sweeter times ahead, and here's hoping that we will all be headed in that direction. Stay safe and take care. We hope to speak to you soon. Dr. Oisan, the political and economic analyst, weighing in on some of the updates of what's been happening at the Parliament with the Dewan Rakyat sitting. It is day 2 out of day 5, and tomorrow we will bring you more updates as we get them. Now, moving on swiftly, looking at some of the news pieces from yesterday, dialing back to Monday, Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin had said the government anticipates that most states will move into phase 4 or the final phase of the National Recovery Plan by October the earliest. Now, so far, we know 8 states has moved into phase 2 of the National Recovery Plan: Perlis, Perak, Pahang, Kelantan, Terengganu, Pulau Pinang, Sabah, and Sarawak. In the meantime, the Prime Minister says that he is praying for the success and safety of the national athletes at the Tokyo Olympics. A total of 30 Malaysian athletes are competing at the Olympics from July 23rd up till August 8th. And former Education Minister Masli Malik has urged the government to make full use of the media to educate students who have been forced to stay home, of course, during the pandemic. He's adding and suggesting for the government to incorporate all channels on radio and TV, and not just focus on using just the internet to reach out to students. So all modes of media, whether it is TV, radio broadcast, or even, of course, the internet. And from that, we move on to Dewan Negara Speaker Tan Sri Rais Yatim, who has been appointed the new chairman of the Special Committee on Corruption effective July 15 for a period of 3 years. Also appointed as new members are 4 senators and 2 parliamentarians. The Prime Minister presented letters of appointment in a brief ceremony at the Parliament building yesterday. Now, here's something on the SOPs at the Parliament. The Ministry of Health is providing saliva-based COVID-19 self-test kits to all MPs attending the special sitting of Dewan Rakyat. The kits will also be made available to all officers and others involved. Here's a quick reminder. These kits are available in the market as well, whether you get them from a pharmacy or any other medical equipment or supply shop. Please go ahead and purchase those test kits. When in doubt, please do a test. Now, the focus of all Malaysian sports fans will surely be on the combination of Pandalela Rinong to deliver the country's first medal at the 2020 Tokyo Olympic Games when they compete in the diving event. After bagging a silver in the women's 10-meter platform synchronized event with Cheong Jun Hong at the 2016 Rio Olympics, she is now kicking off her Tokyo campaign in the same event with Man Yi, and hopes are high that they will be able to end Malaysia's wait for a podium finish there. The divers are set to be in action at 3 p.m. local time, which is of course 2 p.m. Malaysian time at the Tokyo Aquatic Center. And moving on, for more info here, South and North Korea have agreed to restore communication channels and to improve ties. The South Korean President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un reached the agreement during several exchanges of letters since April. Progress. And in Australia's state of Victoria, it says that it will lift strict lockdown after curtailing the spread of COVID-19, while neighbouring New South Wales faces an extension of restrictions after daily new cases spiked to a 16-month peak. New South Wales records 172 new cases so far at this point. We dial back a little bit to see what's happening within the region as well, and of course in the country. Let's quickly look at the housing development sector. Now, they say that this is allowed to operate under phases 1 and 2 of the National Recovery Plan. The Housing and Local Government Ministry says the decision was made during the pandemic management technical meeting back on July 23rd. The permission to operate applies to housing developers whose advertising permit and developer's license are still valid. And from there, so far, the death toll at 207 deaths. Malaysia has recorded the highest daily death toll since the pandemic began. 207 fatalities yesterday, bringing the total number of deaths in the country to 8,201. That's 0.8% of the total cases. A total of 9,372 cases have recovered within the last 24 hours. Now, according to the Health Director General, 1,009 cases are placed in ICUs nationwide. 524 of them require respiratory aid. And it looks like the FT Ministry, or the Ministry of Federal Territories, is providing 4 COVID-19 low-risk quarantine and treatment centres, PKRC, free of charge, especially for DBKL, PPR and public housing residents who are infected with COVID-19 to undergo self-quarantine and avoid the increase in positive cases due to close contact among family members. According to its minister, 4 private PKRCs are at Royal Chulan Hotel in Jalan Conley, the International Youth Centre in Bandar Tun Razak Cheras, Tamu Hotel and Suites in Kampong Baru, and Travel Lodge City Centre Hotel. And a total of 13 localities in Sabah, Kelantan and Pahang will come under EMCO from this Wednesday until August 10th. According to the Deputy Prime Minister, the decision was taken after a special session of the MKN took into account the Health Ministry's risk assessment of trend COVID-19 infection in all localities. Here's a quick reminder that it is real and it's still out there. We all need to do our very best to take care of each other. Kita jaga kita, of course, but also we play our part by staying indoors. Now, moving on to some international news, according to White House, the United States will not lift any existing travel restrictions at this point due to concerns over the highly transmissible COVID-19 Delta variant and the rising number of U.S. coronavirus cases. U.S. President Joe Biden says U.S. forces will end their combat mission in Iraq by the end of this year, but will continue to train and advise Iraqi military. There are currently 2,500 U.S. troops in Iraq. And the U.S. Presence in Iraq has become a major issue since top Iranian General Qasem Soleimani and the leader of an Iran-backed we're looking at what's trending on Twitter. So far, this just in. What's trending on Bernama's Twitter right now? Malaysia has recorded a total of more than 500,000 vaccination as of yesterday. That number, 521,923. And 100,000 COVID-19 self-testing kits will be distributed to all parts of Johor, according to Tengku Mahkota Johor. And Labuan first to receive or to achieve herd immunity against COVID-19 after fully vaccinating 80% of its adult population today. So that's some great news as well. Moving on as well, keeping up with the Olympics, Liu Ying does not want to dwell too much on negative comments on social media. We've been seeing that there's been a lot of flack from, commenters, people taking to the internet and social media to leave their comments for Olympians. Here's just my 2 cents. They've worked really hard. It takes a lot of guts, confidence, courage, hard work to be out there. So let's give them all the support that we can. And also, what else is trending on Twitter? We know that former Health Minister Dr. Zulkifli Ahmad is in many of the conversations that's happening there, as well as Deputy Dewan Rakyat Speaker Datuk Seri Azlina Othman Said. If you ask me about hashtags, well, yes, Kerajaan Gagal seems to be a hashtag that's been trending as well, and the words Spanish fly. Much to do. What's going on social media? We'll be keeping you updated with that. Later on, once we are done here at the Nation Update, the Dewan Rakyat will resume once again. So do remember to keep it locked on and stay with us there as well. Now, here's a quick update, just a quick recap with what we spoke about earlier. We just came back from speaking to Dr. Owisan, an economic and political analyst. And of course, he did reiterate the point that there is a lot of frustration at the parliament because substantial debate is perhaps not being allowed as much. But it is part of the motions. Nothing much can be done at this point of time until everyone has their say. MPs need to have their share as well as the speaker in terms of understanding and providing that protocol and rules of the meeting. So still many questions being directed to the speaker there. Day 2 out of day 5, and then once again it will resume on August 2nd. But in terms of underlining what are some of the other issues, when we spoke to Dr. Owisan, he did say that in terms of not just economic activities, but socially as well, even that is something that needs to be addressed and looked at as soon as possible. And matters related to the revocation of the emergency ordinances continue to be a hot topic of discussion at the special meeting of the Dewan Rakyat, with several opposition MPs demanding immediate explanation and clarification. Now, they referred to Article 150 sub 3 of the Federal Constitution. Gobind Singh Deo questioned whether the revocation of the ordinances was consented to by the Yang di-Pertuan Agong and whether it was done in accordance with the procedures stated in the Federal Constitution. And here's a quick look at some of the highlights. Yesterday, the Prime Minister says the government does anticipate that most states will move into Phase 4, or the final phase of the National Recovery Plan, by October at the earliest. So far, 8 states have already moved into Phase 2. They are namely Perak, Perlis, Pahang, Kelantan, Terengganu, Pulau Pinang, Sabah and Sarawak. And in the meantime as well, the Prime Minister and of course I'm sure all the other ministers and the rest of us here in Malaysia, we are all praying for the success and safety for the national athletes at the Olympics. A total of 30 Malaysian athletes are competing in Tokyo. It started on July 23rd, will go on till August 8th. And so that's it from me right here on the Nation Update. But do stay with us. This is not the end. We will go into the Dewan Rakyat sitting just shortly after this.